Hi guys, and welcome to another 7-minute lecture. Today we will be looking at the difference between conventional warfare and unconventional warfare. So let's look at the two. Conventional and unconventional warfare are essentially two broad categories that are used in many different academic disciplines that study warfare today. So this could be security studies, war studies, international relations. Scholars in all these fields typically tend to classify warfare into these two categories: conventional or traditional, normal type of warfare, and unconventional or irregular and non-traditional types of warfare, right? So let's look at what these two are. Conventional warfare is typically characterized by what the West would consider to be the normal way of fighting. We've got to keep in mind that war theory and military theory today is determined almost exclusively by Western scholars and Western analysts, because they are among the only people who produce cutting edge research on these things, and therefore the Western perspective on the evolution of warfare, the Western understanding of the history of warfare, is what typically passes as the mainstream understanding as well, in terms of terminology and jargon and things like that. So if you look at the 18th and 19th centuries, the early 20th century as well, Western scholars had a very strict understanding, a very fixed understanding of what warfare was. If you look at the Napoleonic Wars, the First World War, the Second World War, these were all clear-cut examples of conventional warfare. So this would be characterized usually by, it would be a state actor with an organized army, a standing army, and another state actor with an organized and standing army. There would be a clear-cut battlefield. There would be soldiers on both sides who were uniformed combatants. There would be a clear-cut distinction between war and peace. So these are all the things that pretty much characterized and still do characterize conventional warfare. Unconventional warfare is the break from all of these things. So they would typically be characterized by, it would either be a non-state actor versus a state actor, or maybe even a non-state actor versus another non-state actor, like two terrorist organizations, for example, fighting it out with each other. So unconventional warfare will typically be characterized by hit and run tactics. There will be no uniform standing army on both sides. Non-state actors typically tend to blend in with civilians and use that as an advantage. There will be no fixed battlefield. You and I could be at a shopping mall somewhere tomorrow, and it could become the scene of a terrorist attack. We are all in the front lines, so to speak, when it comes to unconventional warfare, right? When we look at the world around us today, we see that conventional warfare is almost non-existent. The vast majority of armed conflict that we see all over the world today will be characterized as unconventional warfare. So this rise and proliferation of unconventional warfare presents two major challenges to us as the world. There's a legal challenge and there's a political challenge as well. Legally, the big obstacle is that the laws of war, humanitarian law, are almost fundamentally geared towards tackling conventional warfare. If you look at the major principles of international law, such as distinction, proportionality, these are all issues which can, to a certain extent, be applied with a clear-cut level of accuracy and reliability in a conventional battlefield. Even there it would be hard, but there it would still be possible, and state actors, it's still reasonable for us to expect them to commit to those obligations. In a conventional war, when we look at unconventional wars, on the other hand, things are completely different, because many of these principles that are meant to guide combatants on the battlefield are simply not viable in an unconventional war setting. The strategic and tactical necessity on the ground, all of those are completely different from what you would face in conventional warfare. And therefore, when we see countries today that manage to be successful when it comes to defeating terrorism, when it comes to defeating insurgencies, when state actors are successful in unconventional warfare, you almost immediately see certain vested interests in the international community coming out to accuse those countries of human rights violations, war crimes violations, any kind of sort of trespass on the laws of war. Because when applied strictly to an unconventional warfare setting, the laws of war will always make the counter-insurgent look like the bad guy, because the insurgents use these laws to their advantage. The whole idea, for instance, that you cannot fire on human shields, if anything, if we look at the world around us today, that is encouraging civilians, terrorists, to start taking up civilians as shields. Right? So, in a way, the law that is meant to protect civilians in conventional warfare ends up making civilians vulnerable in unconventional warfare, because the terrorist and insurgent groups are not, they don't see themselves as recognizing international law, so they are free to take up human shields in order to bolster their own defenses, and the state actor that responds to them will be unable to achieve any tactical success without breaking these laws of war. So that's the legal challenge. Then there's the political challenge, which is that the present political system that we have today is not geared to deal with the rise of armed non-state actors and the participation of so many non-state actors in the predominant form of warfare. And what I mean by that is, if we look at the United Nations, for example, if we look at most political agreements and the political structures, they are all geared towards state actors. They are all geared towards trying to govern, trying to deal with, trying to find compromise between state actors. There is really no present tangible mechanism available to us through which non-state actors can be dealt with on a political level as well. Even though when we look at most wars around the world today, one of the major parties involved will inevitably be a non-state actor, right? So those are the two major challenges that we face from the rise of unconventional warfare. And this is important for us to keep in mind, because as we progress, the proliferation of unconventional warfare will only grow bigger and bigger, and the extinction of conventional warfare, some people say, is almost on us now. So we will have to start thinking about these problems, and we will have to start figuring out solutions for the legal and political problems that come with increases in unconventional warfare. That's it for today, guys. If you like our content, please subscribe to the channel and like the video. Thank you. I'll see you next time.